So welcome everyone to the 9th of our AirMiners events. My name is Jason Grillo. I'm the event director for AirMiners. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many people. We're a little bit off cadence today on account of a new announcement that Shopify did. Normally we do our events every 2 weeks, but we decided to insert one in light of some pretty significant news coming from the carbon removal world. So in light of that, we have a panel of recipients from Shopify and Stacy Kauk from Shopify to talk about the announcement and what it means for the carbon dioxide removal industry going forward, as we're on an inflection point, I believe, and a pathway to remove as much carbon dioxide from the air as quickly as we can. So a few notes before we get started, before I hand it over to Alexandra Guerra from Nori, who will be our moderator today. First of all, today is going to be a carbon negative event. So on account of the voluntary purchases of carbon negative tickets by several of you in the audience, thank you very much again. We are going to be able to purchase carbon removal credits that will make us carbon negative today. Going into some past events that we did, I'm also happy to announce that we have recently removed Carbon Cure has removed carbon on behalf of past AirMiners events. And that transaction just came through. Thank you to Jennifer Wagner, president of Carbon Cure, and the Carbon Cure team for that. Speaking of Carbon Cure, Jennifer Wagner is here. Again, she's the president of Carbon Cure. Rob Niven, the CEO of Carbon Cure, is not here, which is slightly bad news, but for an extremely good reason, that his family has grown by one, literally overnight. So congratulations to Rob. And we're excited to have Jennifer here to talk about the Shopify investment from the perspective of Carbon Cure. Finally, a little bit about the program. We're going to have our panel for 35 minutes, as we typically do, then Q&A. So feel free to enter those questions into the chat below. And then, as we normally do, at the top of the hour, we'll stop the meeting. We'll have a couple concluding remarks. We'll stop recording, and then we'll hang on for another 15 minutes or so that we as AirMiners can get to know one another in breakout rooms for those who want to hang on for another maybe 15 or 20 minutes after. So looking forward to that. In the meantime, thanks again, and I'll hand it over to Alexandra to take it away from here.
Thanks, Jason. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking your time today. I hope this is a fun conversation for you. I hope you get to learn a lot. We have a lot to discuss because this, as Jason said, is an inflection point for carbon removal, and things are moving quickly. So I will do my best to address some of the questions that came through in the form before. So if you registered and submitted a question, we have those. We'll save that towards the end. We'll let the conversation go forward. And then after those questions, I will keep an eye on the chat to see if there's any new questions pertinent to the conversation being had, and I'll ask those. I ask you all to stay muted. This is we're hosting a panel here, so it's just the panel is kind of responding, and then towards the end, we'll have some time for people to ask their own questions. With that, I'll get started with some introductions. My name is Alexandra Guerra. I am a co-founder and director of corporate development at Nori. I'm moderating this, but Nori is also one of the recipients of the Sustainability Fund from Shopify. Thank you. We also have Jennifer Wagner, who Jason already introduced. Pleasure to have you, Jennifer. Antti Vihavainen from puro.earth, which is also a carbon removal marketplace based in Finland. And then last but certainly not least, Stacy Kauk, who is the head of sustainability of the Sustainability Fund at Shopify. Welcome, everybody. All right, so I'm going to get started with my first question. I think it's really important. Stacy, can you tell us a little bit about what this fund is, how it was decided that you were going to have this fund, which was announced last year, and then what did that process look like in the last year?
Wonderful. Well, first off, I'd just like to say hello to everyone. I'm really excited to be here. So yeah, let's start from the beginning. Last September in 2019, Shopify's CEO decided that it was time to get involved, and it was time to find a way to jumpstart this industry sector. So basically what happened was the commitment was $5 million annually, with a minimum of 1 million going to carbon sequestration. That's the core of the fund. And really it's all about finding a way to use our $5 million to maximize impact and to really try to catalyze change. So the high level idea is to really find a way where Shopify can get involved and can find removals to support and to purchase that perhaps need a little bit of a push, or perhaps maybe needing some additional research. And we decided to form our fund in two buckets. So we have our Frontier bucket, or our Frontier portfolio as we're calling it, which are these cutting edge, just starting, maybe there's some risk involved, those kinds of industries that really need support to scale. And then we have our Evergreen portfolio, which represent some of the solutions that are currently available. So our vision was to support all of the things and to try to find a way to have impact in all of the different verticals that exist for carbon removal. So that's sort of the high level, and that's what was conceived of a year ago. I was brought on at the end of January to build out this program and to find a way to spend all of that budget. And I think one of the things I reflected on, I thought that would be easy. And then now I've really learned that it's a challenge to find ways to spend $5 million in an impactful way that's really going to help move things forward. So we spend a lot of time building out our network and conducting deep research to try to figure out who to support. So I'm really happy to have several of the people that we decided to invest in their companies on this call today. And I see some of the people in the audience as well representing other sustainability fund recipients. So great to see everyone.
So can you tell us a little bit about those challenges with having to spend $5 million? I don't think I'd have a problem, but.
Yeah, so to be clear, it's not an investment fund in the strict sense of doing equity investments. It's actually a capital expenditure fund. So we need to buy something. And that is a bit of a challenge if you've given yourself a mandate to try to have the most impact you can. We didn't set out to just buy, $5 million of offsets across different projects. We decided we wanted to investigate and learn as much as we could along the way. So we decided to try to be as diverse as possible in the different verticals that we supported. So we needed to find creative ways to make our spend have an impact. And one of the things that we decided to overcome that challenge and to really try to make sure we were making good decisions is that we made a commitment to overspend. And so we're trying to have a higher price per ton in some of our purchase agreements. And the reason behind that is we want to provide additional funding to these companies that allows them to undertake research, to conduct pilot scale testing, to do proof of concept, to fund investments taken to do the research to support the monitoring and verification component of the effort. So we're overpaying, and we're doing that on purpose because we want to provide enough funding that these companies are able to scale.
That's great. So then let's hear from the panelists. So Jennifer and Auntie, can you tell us what are some of the challenges that you've had? Like how does this help you? Because what Stacy's saying here is Shopify wanted to support the diverse portfolio of carbon removal companies and what they're doing. How did this support you? Jennifer and then Auntie.
Sure, thanks. Nice to see everybody today. Thanks for having me, Jason and Tito, and Stacy for the contribution. This is a really exciting time for not just the recipients, but I think the broader sector in general. So really excited to see so many people on the call today. So for us, what this investment meant for Carbon Cure is we're a little further along than some of the other recipients in that we have plants operating now. Just shy of 300 plants are using our technology. And we're sort of in that rapid scaling mode. And what the credits revenue allows us to do is to then in turn take that revenue and put it back in the hands of the concrete producers who are using our technology. And that creates an incentive for them to adopt all of those behaviors that in turn will create more offsets in the future. So we give them $1 today, or a bunch of dollars. They'll move a little faster, adopt the technology at more plants, use it more often, maximize the amount of CO2 that they can consume. And all of those things create more offsets, which we can then sell to either Shopify or somebody else. And so by injecting that cash into this space, we think that we can move a lot more quickly than we've been moving to date. So our mission as a company is to reduce 500 megatons by 2030. And I think investments by Stacey's group will really help to accelerate that pathway.
Yeah, from Puro's perspective, I think there were at least threefold types of effects. Obviously, we are a carbon removal marketplace. We don't do the removal ourselves, but we have a network of suppliers who do that. And we do the verification based on the methodologies that we have created. And now this purchase by Shopify sent a signal to these companies that have invested their time and effort into making the LCAs as we require them to, having the audits and verifications done, paying a lot of time and effort into making all of this happen. And now it was made worthwhile. That's one thing. The second thing is that obviously the money allows them to open some bottlenecks that they may have in their production to accelerate their development. And of course, from our perspective, this allows us to attract new suppliers into our ecosystem. So it's really, really useful, especially now that Shopify has made a big splash in this scene. And therefore is very famous, and the announcement and us being involved in that announcement has helped us, and there's been a new influx of companies that have contacted us and want to join our network.
And then I've gotten permission from the hosts, Tito and Jason, to chime in every now and then with some of Nori's input as well. For us, it was very similar. So Nori is a carbon removal marketplace, but we're focused on regenerative agriculture, and similar to what Anti's describing, it was very helpful to us to show suppliers like that this is something that there's demand for from companies, and we'll continue to see more of this, especially with more and more companies making announcements. But especially when we're talking about carbon removal marketplaces or creating your own methodologies in some way, we're kind of having to compete with other existing registries, and this is really important and impactful to show that like we can do things, we can do things similarly, create a new transparent methodology, and become a new entrant into the marketplace of certifications for carbon removals. That being said, Stacey, you talked about trying to make diverse investments. Was there any risk to this?
Well, I mean, making diverse investments, like Jen mentioned in her last response, that they're further along. We also wanted to make sure that we were partnering with companies or investing in companies or making purchases in a way that if we didn't do it, something wouldn't happen. Or if we did do it, then we were inciting something additional to happen that maybe wouldn't have taken place if we weren't there. And we've gone into this eyes wide open. We know that, not that we are trying to predict the future, but things are going to work out and some things are not going to work out. And there's some research that's being funded by our spend that may come back with the results that we're not hoping for. It may come back and we may disprove a solution, or we may find that there's maybe a better way to do it. But what we're doing is we're trying to take a little bit of risk in that regard, because we feel that it's important to either prove or disprove the path forward. And we have a bit of a luxury since we're a software provider in that our footprint, like our core operation footprint, isn't that big. so we can spend on some higher priced removals. We have that luxury because we don't have a massive footprint to be dealing with. And historically, it's not that big either. We're just starting to hit our scale as a company and really starting to take off. So our footprint, we really have to focus on emissions reductions now. But if we're looking backwards, we don't have a massive footprint like a company in a different sector would have. So we have overbought, definitely overpurchased on tonnage, and we've overpaid, and we're realizing that we are going to have some losses. There are going to be some challenges, but that's part of what we've committed to doing. We really want to learn. And that's one of the reasons we decided to go broadly and try to get involved in many verticals, is that we want to follow along with the companies and with these startups to see how things progress so that we can learn more as a company and then apply that to our sustainability fund going forward. So there is going to be some risk, and we're going to lose some money. We're going to get some tonnage that's not delivered. And actually, I think that makes me really happy, because that means we're pushing the boundary, and it means that we're having an impact with what we're spending our money on.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you for that. And when it comes to pushing the boundary, I'm imagining that there were some constraints. So can you tell us, what did your decision-making process look like? Because there are so many, someone here in the chat said there's probably over 200 companies in this space. How did that decision-making process take part in this process?
For sure. So we decided not to go with a traditional RFP where we could get, probably over 200 submissions that we then have to, like myself and my one team member would then be poring over, trying to apply, a scoring card and a ranking criteria. And that just seemed like it may not be worth for us the amount of time and effort that it would take. And if we use that time and effort instead to do deep research and to build out our network and to not recreate the expertise that already exists out in the ecosystem. We've been plugged in with top researchers and academics and other people who've been working in this field for 20, 30 years. And that's really allowed us to level up our understanding and without recreating the wheel. So we decided that we were going to create an offline process where we would explore and build out our network and identify those companies that we did want to meet with and connect with to better understand their technology. And while it wasn't a formal RFP, we built these relationships with these companies and ended up having several meetings over several months to talk through what working together would look like, because sort of this ties back to the beginning where we wanted to make sure that when we were investing money, we weren't just buying a tonnage. The tonnage we were buying at the price we were buying was then enabling change to happen and enabling these companies to move forward and to maybe even jumpstart something that they had to wait for because they weren't quite ready yet, but this funding would allow them to get moving. So we had a bit of an ad hoc process, but we did apply the scientific rigor of the community and the financial due diligence that we're capable of in-house. So we put that all together and decided that that would probably be a faster way to stand up our program. Now, all that to say, this is the first year and we're going to experiment and we're going to iterate and it's going to change over time. It doesn't mean that next year we won't maybe do an RFP to support our continued exploration that we're doing also. So we're going to try this. We're going to see what happens. We're going to look for feedback and we're going to make sure that we keep moving forward in a way that allows us to make sure that our $5 million is more than $5 million.
We're talking a lot about process here, and you're one example, or Shopify is one example of a few companies that in the past year have made some commitments, mostly all in the tech space. So let's talk about from the panelist side, as companies in the carbon removal space, what does the process look like for you? Again, Jennifer, Antti.
Yeah, I think to your point about the sort of tidal wave of announcements and energy in the space over the last few months, whether that's like carbon removal offset purchases from like Stripe and Shopify, or new investment funds like Amazon, their new climate fund, or even just the climate pledges and commitments around carbon neutrality from like, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Google, even Walmart. Seems like everybody's kind of jumping on the bandwagon, and that's exactly what we want. I think for us to collectively achieve what we need to achieve, it can't fall under the shoulders just of tech. It needs to be broader than that, and it needs to sort of go mainstream, if you will. And if that can happen, then we can, attract more folks to the space who have, the ideas in the lab. Maybe we can accelerate that and get it out into industry, or for companies, who've received Shopify's first funds, move them along faster. I'll speak for ourselves. Like, we have a lot of supply left over, so we're looking for buyers. So from our perspective, there are not enough buyers out there right now. So if we can bring more buyers into this space, then that will allow us to go to the concrete industry and say, hey, look at all this demand, sign up as quickly as possible. And then that's where we get to where we need to be. So I think I'm just so happy and excited and sort of optimistic of where this space is going, but we don't have time to kind of, leave it just to a handful of companies. We got to move forward with a sort of a broader commitment by many sectors.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, I'm really appreciate the Shopify approach of not going through a RFP process. I'm not a huge fan of those. I've been filling in, too many RFPs in my life. It's a tedious process on both sides. It's not very effective or efficient, and the business won't scale this way. If everybody, if all these thousands of companies that make these pledges, in the next few years will go through an RFP process, everybody's clogged. Nobody will be able to do the actual sequestration anymore, because all they are doing is working on the RFPs. So that's worth a praise, I would say. So in order to avoid the RFPs, but still enable, high quality purchases and making wise decisions, I think it would be good to have some sort of common criteria, well-established criteria, what qualifies as carbon removal. So I'm aware that there are processes ongoing on that field, and obviously we plan to meet and exceed those criteria. So it will be easy to choose us or some of the other ones that will be matching that criteria. So I guess that more sort of transparency and more liquidity in the marketplace is definitely needed. For sure, how that will be arranged will be seen, but I guess there are multiple carbon marketplaces that are figuring out how to make that a good and nice experience for the buyers as well. So looking at the demand side from our perspective, I think at the moment we are we don't have a 500 million roadmap published yet, unfortunately. So at the moment we are in a situation, although we do have a roadmap that extends to megaton scale, and now we are sort of seeing that we are moving from this demand constraint business to supply constraint business. Which in a way is positive, but then again, it's a delicate balance. If we are not able to provide, the negative emissions that our customers would like to get, then obviously we have failed. So, we try to maintain that balance and make sure that there's enough availability, even though there's a lot of incoming, at least interest. From interest to actual purchase, it always takes some time, but at the moment, the interest is very high.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Antti, makes a lot of sense with regard to RFPs. And I think it depends too. So it's worth stating not every RFP is the same. Over-prescriptive RFPs require the same, like they're trying to templatize carbon removal does not necessarily work, I have seen, because carbon removal from different methods just have completely different questions to ask. And it becomes very difficult to answer and respond to those, very tedious. But then there can be RFPs that are broader, like here are 6 questions, send me a proposal. Those are not so bad, because you tailor your answer specifically to those things and write a proposal to hit those 6 bullet points. But that being said, what exactly does the carbon market look like? Because it's different for every single company. So, who are the key stakeholders for you? We'll go Stacy, Jennifer, Auntie, and what do you need to see from stakeholders in order to address some of the challenges you have today?
So I think the key stakeholders for us, because we're a carbon removal buyer, that's what we're doing, even though we're trying to use that angle to do a few other things. Since we're a buyer, what we're looking for is that supply. We're also, because of the philosophical approach that we've taken, that we want to try to support and follow along in a variety of sectors and a variety of verticals. There's some places where there's no supply yet. There's, for example, mineralization is a really good example where things seem to be quite early. There's a couple of options, but at the same time, it needs to advance just a little bit more in order to buy, a good volume. So there's a few places where we're looking for supply, like I mentioned with mineralization, but for us, it's really that transition point between the amazing research that's happening and then it becoming a company and putting its product in the market. We want that product to be there so we can be that consumer. But there's a transition that has to happen where it leaves the academic and research environment and is conceptualized into a business that I can then make a purchase from. And I think there's a lot of promise there, and that needs to be brought along by other stakeholders in the ecosystem so that we're able to make those purchases. So I think that's the biggest need we have.
Thanks, Stacy. What about you, Jennifer? What kind of needs do you guys see from the marketplace?
Yeah, so if you look at sort of our stakeholders, it's, you look at the supply chain, you kind of go up and down it. So you got the emitter who's emitting the CO2, the concrete producer who's then consuming it, and then the end user who's building with that concrete, whether they're building like a sidewalk or a skyscraper. And then there's sort of the tangential stakeholders like the academics, the policymakers, and of course the credit buyers. So I think the message that I'd like to leave with the group is, I'm sure most of you fall into at least one of those categories. And there's a role that really everybody can play in the transition to this sort of low carbon economy, whether it's, building with low carbon materials or mandating that they be used on construction projects, doing critical research in the area. If you're a media, sort of telling those success stories. I think everybody has a role to play. And if we can all sort of think about what's needed and how you can contribute, then collectively, both supply and demand will rise, and we'll get to where we need to be.
Yeah, on our ecosystem, there's approximately, say, a dozen different roles, and each one of them has a significant part to play. They range from, the footprint analysts to the LCA consultants and various kinds of supply aggregators, channel partners, and so forth. But I think one thing that is lacking at the moment, there's a lot of talk about capital investments into these facilities that actually do the sequestration, but in our network, we're not really seeing much of that really taking place. I think Jennifer represents a rare exception over here with the cooperation with Amazon, but many of our suppliers are saying that they don't really, they don't have, if they need to get 2 to 20 million euros or dollars for their next facility. That's too little for some of the financing instruments that are available, and that's too much to be funded from the sale of these corks or CO2 removal certificates. So that's a nasty situation at the moment, and I would definitely appreciate if there were some solutions that I, for example, know that the Foundation for Climate Restoration is working on things like this to collect a network of investors that would be working on, or would be willing to invest in these things. So a lot of work going on, but still not really, the money is not really moving yet.
Thanks, guys. Just going through some of these questions here. There's a lot going on. Okay, so what support specifically do we need? Same cycle.
No problem. I think one of the things that we would love to see is, and we touched on it sort of earlier in our discussion, is for the demand for the purchases to extend beyond tech. We really want it to become mainstreamed. We want other sectors to join in and to start spending their money on carbon removal. And we tried to support that in the fact that we built out our website to make sure that we presented the information about each of the different verticals to try to sort of unmask some of the complexity for those that aren't overly familiar with carbon removal, to provide that learning and that discoverability on, here's how we did it, this is why we did it. If that makes sense for you, then here's the companies that we spent our money on, or here's the things that we wish were different. So we really want other folks to join in and to buy more. So it needs to expand beyond tech, and there's a bit of a barrier there because we're going to need to overcome that. And I think we're going to keep going in terms of our transparency and sharing how our experience goes. We already talked about early on, we didn't do an RFP, we did our own adaptive ad hoc type process, and we're going to learn from that, and we're going to share what we think we're going to try next, or the same thing worked, we're going to do that again. We're also going to share as much as we can along the way about how our spend worked out. What was the impact? Did it turn out like we thought it was going to? Were there delays? Were there things that we thought would happen that were going to be a challenge and then they weren't? We're going to really try to have that conversation and to put that out there so that we're not all operating in silos. We're sharing that information.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and someone actually in the chat had asked that, are you going to be sharing the learnings? So it's really good that Shopify is doing that, because it just, your early adopters, you're learning a lot, you're testing the boundaries, and then sharing what you've learned through that process could be helpful. Okay, so sorry, there's so many questions here and we're kind of bouncing all over the place. This is hard.
Can I quickly respond to that question though, Alexandra, if you don't mind, while you're digging? So I was just thinking about this. So for us, in terms of our needs, what we need primarily is more concrete producers to use our technology. Because without them actually pressing on the technology, then we don't have any carbon removal. So that's sort of the first thing. But I sort of look at that as, if we think holistically, like we can try and convince them to use the technology, and like that'll happen over time organically, but it'll be slow and we don't have time to be slow. So we can sort of accelerate the demand in 3 different ways. One, with the credit buyers like Shopify, which allows us to go to the producer and say, hey, sign up faster. 2, specifications in the private sector for construction projects. So if you're building a data center or a condo building or a new school, if the client can say, I want lower carbon building materials, or ideally materials made with sequestered CO2, then that can incentivize the producer to come online faster. And then the third would be public procurement policies, which can incentivize concrete producers to, again, adopt the technology. So there's a couple of examples of that. If you want to look at our website, you can. But in the New York State, there's a bill there that's giving preferential procurement for producers who sequester CO2 in concrete. And then in Hawaii as well, there's a great model that we've used there where the DOT, the city of Honolulu, and the state have preferentially procured concrete made with CO2. So those are a couple of examples of accelerators that can help move the market forward.
Yeah, and yeah, I fully agree with all of those. I think one thing to add perhaps is that it seems that the regulators, at least in Europe, are waking up and discovering this concept of carbon removal. And there's a tender, or there was a tender on developing a mechanism for including carbon removals in the EU ETS, which is the EU emission trading system. The earliest time for it to become, if it becomes reality, is 2023, which is quite quickly, as a matter of fact, and remains to be seen what will be the criteria, but that will definitely, if that is established, that will probably have a global effect or impact on what can be considered as carbon removal and what not. Yeah, so it will be interesting to see if that happens. That may also lead to overheating of the market, and that may have some undesired, let's say, effects as well.
I mean, this is an interesting topic, bringing up EU ETS, and someone did on the chat, but compliance versus voluntary offsets. Stacey, do you guys have any eye on what a type of compliance commitment would look like? Is that something that's on your radar, or are you sticking purely voluntarily?
So we're not regulated in Canada here in terms of a regulatory market. We're voluntarily participating in this. Part of our initial announcement last year was a commitment to be carbon neutral. Since we were founded in 2004, that's been realized. What we are doing, in a year, it's been quite remarkable to hear the change of discourse that's gone from carbon neutral, a couple people chatting about net zero, and now, being carbon negative is really the gold standard out in the market, especially in the tech space. So, voluntarily going forward, we're evaluating what that looks like for us as a software company, because scope 3 gets really interesting when you start to pick through, we're a commerce platform. So, there's over 1 million businesses on Shopify. And when you start looking at scope 3 and picking through where to draw your boundaries, it gets very interesting. So we're currently in that process of thinking through where we're comfortable with our boundary being, what's our area of influence. And going forward, we're very much focused on carbon removal as opposed to avoided emissions. So that's where we're focused. And I would be surprised on the regulatory agenda in Canada that we would end up having to make some kind of regulatory commitment to our carbon footprint, just because we're such a low emitting sector in Canada and we're quite small. But voluntarily, we're here.
Yeah, it seems that there's a lot of demand as it stands right now and growing for voluntary offsets for carbon removal. We should stop using the word offsets. It's something we keep saying, because offsets is that umbrella, right? Like it's the reductions, the avoidance, removals. So I should be better about it. At Nori, we just say carbon removals. But I'm curious if Jennifer or Antti have anything to add on the topic of like compliance and these voluntary credits. Like, do you want them to apply to compliance schemes? Which ones are you considering?
I think for us, at least in the short term, the higher the price, the more quickly we can move the market. So I think from what I've seen, at least, the voluntary market, you're going to be able to offer higher prices to the industry. So that's our short-term play. We've tried to go down the path of some of the compliance opportunities, and they just seem to be super, super slow. So we just can't afford to wait.
Yeah, the other, the danger in high prices is, of course, that we are blocking away some of the companies that do have a lot of emissions. They cannot afford. They may be in low margin businesses, and if the price is very high, then that may have an adverse effect again, for carbon removal. So I think there needs to be choice. But all in all, I think it would be good if carbon removal was included in some of the regulatory schemes, and it's just that when and how, and if there's a let's say a pressure valve of some sort that enables or prevents the market from overheating. I think that would be useful.
And ideally too, the price will come down over time. Like that's the whole point, right? Is that we have the high prices in the short term so that you can invest in the space, kind of drive down those tech costs, and then over time that will kind of stabilize.
This is a great point for a question that we had before this started, which is, what is Shopify's perspective on cost? What do the costs look like now? What do you expect for them to be in the future, and how might that change your involvement in this?
Sure. So for cost, I mean, we have a huge range across what we decided to invest in this past year. I mean, it's massive. You can go from, forest protection type removals all the way to direct air capture removals, and that price spectrum is massive. Really, in the long term, we are looking to try, like Jennifer mentioned, to make those purchases at higher prices now so that cost curves can be driven down and things can scale. But I think one thing to layer in on that is, if the demand starts heating up as all of these big companies have made these massive commitments to be retroactively net zero or carbon negative, those are some very large footprints. And one of the things that I think remains to be seen is what happens when that demand curve starts going up, 2025, 2028, 2030. We've made these high price purchases now with the hopes of driving the cost down. But if we can't get them to scale in time, I think the increased demand could hold prices high, depending on how it all works out. And I think that's sort of the long-term play that, from Shopify's perspective, we're really interested in seeing how that works out, because with the demand, I think it may be a little unpredictable. Like, there are some verticals where if people in those spaces think that the cost may go up, and it just may be because the cost relative to other carbon removals will be less expensive. And once the science and the research, if it proves that this is more of a permanent solution, then perhaps they can charge more. Because I think that's where the pricing, obviously with technology and capital expenditures, your cost gets driven up. But if some of maybe the more nature-based solutions, the science becomes more rigorous and we're convinced that they're having extended storage, maybe there's some value in that permanence that's intrinsic that will increase the price in those verticals. I think there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to those economies, and we'll just have to see how it plays out.
Absolutely, especially within like nature-based solutions where you have a huge reliance on monitoring and verification of, let's say, forest credits or regenerative agriculture.
Yep.
Having that maintained, that monitored throughout time, the lifetime of the project is pretty costly now. And, with drones and LiDAR and other things, this could drive down that cost of supply and therefore drive down the cost of credits, assuming that the demand curve doesn't go too high. Okay, I'm gonna open this up. Oh, I have one final question, then I'll open this up to the audience questions that are coming in, and I'll also lead that a little bit. But let's go again, Stacy, Jennifer, Auntie, what is your call to action for people on this call? Like, what is the thing that you would like? And keep in mind, like, we have people who are working at organizations that are entrepreneurs like ours, or they're individuals trying to get in the space, or they could be buyers, it could be any type. So what's your call to action?
So I've been thinking about this because my initial reaction was more people other than tech need to get in here and start buying. And then I really think that over the course of the last couple of weeks, what's become clear to me is that there's a need to start, and we may not know where we're going, and we may not know what the perfect scenario is, or the perfect solution, or the most impactful way to spend our money. But I think what we all need to know is that it's urgent, and whatever role you play in the ecosystem, don't hesitate and to make it happen. And so as a purchaser, we're not going to hesitate. We're going to buy those removals that are unproven. We're going to allow people to experiment and to test and to improve what they're doing. And I think that that can be translated across the entire supply chain as well as the demand chain. So I would encourage everyone to do what they can in the position they're in and to not wait.
Yeah, thanks. Jennifer?
Yeah, I would just echo Stacey's comment. I think if you're, for us at least, if you're, a user of the products that are potentially made with the carbon removal technologies, or if you're a policymaker, if you work for a city, if you're a regulator, an academic, I think there's a role that everybody can play in moving these solutions forward. I think there's not like a silver bullet solution here. We kind of need all of the options, all of the above. We've got to move them forward as quickly as possible, and there'll be some winners and some losers, but at least we'll be heading in the right direction.
I would have said start now if it hadn't been stolen already by my dear colleagues. But in order to come up with something new, I would say that think with your own brains and trust them.
Auntie, you there?
Ecosystem of carbon removal. We did that. Can you hear me?
Yes, you cut out for a while, but it was like at this perfect point that we thought you were dramatic pausing a point. Continue.
Okay.
Think with your own
All
mind.
right, yeah.
Trust it, yes.
So think with your own brains, innovate. If you are in a position where it is possible for you to figure out the way to sequester carbon, some splash about it, tell us about it, tell Alexandra about it, and let's see if we can fit it in our frameworks. If you are a buyer, use your brains. Think what is what works for you. Test it out. Start small, but start.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. There was a question that was in the pre-registration, which was how do we make partnerships in this climate space? And I'll chime in here, and then we'll let the panelists chime in, and then I'll move on. I'll read on the questions from the chat. But when it comes to making partnerships in this space, I think the biggest thing is engaging in these events, networking, and like connecting to us or whoever it is that you think might be a good partner, having an introductory call. We're all entrepreneurs, we're all in this new space together. So there's just like very, very rare times that we would not, that anybody said no to me for a call. So we're all in this together, which is nice about this space. There's no real big competition. I guess technically in other tech spaces, like we would be on a panel and we'd be competitors and probably be like a little spicy, but we're all on the planet and we're all here trying to solve like, how do we draw down carbon? So it's kind of nice. I'm going to move on to questions now. So there was one from Ryan Anderson. Will Shopify disclose the cost of each type of credit, similar to Stripe's open application and publishing, the cost and the volumes?
Yeah, we've been asked this a couple times, and no, we will not be. And there's reasons for that. And really what it is in some spaces we're participating and we have contracts and agreements with multiple companies. And the reason for that is that we want to see how the different models progress and we want to learn. And so we're not going to be sharing that if it's going to be causing, issues of competition and whatnot. And one thing also is that it's a little bit different than other purchases where we're overpaying on purpose. So the price per ton doesn't really reflect necessarily what the price per ton would be for another customer, because perhaps we're funding a research project through the price on the tonnage. So it's not necessarily a true reflection of the market either.
Another question from Habib. This is more for you, Jennifer. He imagines long-run concrete consumption would be a limit to the amount of carbon sequestered by carbon cure And he's wondering, what's the long-term sequestration capacity limit for carbon cure in North America on a ton per year basis?
I'd have to do the calculation. So is he suggesting that concrete consumption is going up or down?
The long run concrete consumption would be a limit for the amount of carbon sequestered.
Oh, I see. Because we're only applicable to concrete. Yeah. I think a couple things there. So one is there's no shortage of concrete. It's by far the most abundant man-made material on Earth. I think if you combine all of the other construction materials, concrete is still more. So I think it'll be a long time before we get there. But in a perfect world, if we do address all of that, we're also in the meantime working on other technologies that would further allow us to consume further additional CO2 within the same ton of concrete. So I think we'll continue to address more concrete, but also continue to increase the impact like per yard of concrete, if that makes sense.
Another question from Carlos. So this is for Stacy. What is the Frontiers program time horizon from Shopify's perspective? If you are investing in cutting edge technologies, what is Shopify's opinion of CDR solutions that leverage renewable energy supply? And will this program have any an annually renewing intake?
Okay, lots of elements in that question.
Yes.
So the first part about the renewable energy, we do take a life cycle analysis approach to the carbon that's removed, and we're considering obviously the inputs that are required to remove that carbon. So obviously companies that are using renewables are situated in locations with really nice clean power grids, then they'll have a better probably price per ton because they'll get more tonnage. And so that's one element. We are doing full life cycle approach. In terms of the Frontier portfolio, we have a $5 million annual commitment that will actually increase as our revenue increases. So as Shopify grows, we'll allocate more money to our fund. For the Frontier portfolio, it depends on the situation for the time horizon. What we've done is in some situations, what we wanted to do was provide demand security for the companies that we're working with. So we have multi-year agreements where we're committed to making minimum purchases so that the companies that we're working with are able to demonstrate that long-term revenue stream. So it's case-by-case basis, and it depends on what is most beneficial for the company, but we also balance that with the risk. We don't want to give away, not give away, but like spend millions of dollars and then actually get no carbon removal. So we're very, very careful in how we structure these things. So for example, we have some agreements that may be only for 1 year and some can be many, many years. So the Frontier portfolio is something that we will continue to have. Some of the existing companies may stay in the Frontier portfolio over time as they scale and as things are successful. We've also left ourselves some room to play around and add in new solutions and new companies as they become available. So we've got some flexibility, but then we also have a foundation.
All right, we've got 4 minutes left. I gotta hand it back over to Jason for some AirMiners announcements. Thank you everybody for your wonderful listening skills, questions, and to the panelists for your time.
Thanks for having us, Alexandra.
And a special thanks to Alexandra for such masterful moderating. Very insightful questions, very good discussion from all. So thank you very much for everything. So good. We are approaching the end, as we noticed. So a couple of announcements. First, in 2 weeks' time, we are going to have our next AirMiners event focused on environmental justice. This is going to be a little bit of a special event, which will be 90 minutes instead of our typical 60 minutes long. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Before the end of the day, we are going to send out our post-event survey, as well as hope to get the recording of this event up on YouTube. And finally, and if you are on the call today or on the Zoom today and not a member of AirMiners, what's keeping you? Please do feel free to apply. Go to airminers.org and submit an application, and would love to hear from you that way. So with that, we are going to make this a wrap. Tito, do you have anything to add from here?
Great to see everybody here, and it's just, it's totally testament to the power of bringing everybody together, getting all these questions before the event, during the chat. I think that's what this is really about. Some people are going to be watching this later, but they're going to miss out. They're not going to be able to ask their questions. So I look forward to whatever our next event is scheduled for, and then seeing that announcement go out, and seeing you all there.
Yep, and I especially appreciated the point about networking and partnerships being so crucial at a at a nation stage of carbon removal. Getting to know each other is one of the best ways of helping us make the whole industry grow. So looking forward to partaking in that in the future. All right, folks. So thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording. And if you want to hang around for Zoom networking in breakout rooms, feel free.